The machine let out a sharp screech, followed by a metallic grinding noise. A worker yanked his hand back just in time, his face pale. The factory floor was loud, chaotic, and hotter than it should have been. Something was wrong. Ethan Cole, CEO of the company, stood nearby, dressed in a worn-out uniform with a fake name tag that read Mike. His safety goggles were slightly fogged from the heat, and his hands were slick with sweat. He had built this company from the ground up. But lately, reports had been troubling delayed shipments, rising injury claims, and whispers of workers feeling unsafe. He'd heard enough. He needed to see it for himself. With 12 factory locations across the state, no one here had ever met him in person. His disguise was simple dyed hair, a beard, and a southern accent he'd practiced in his car. He had even worn scuffed-up boots to blend in. No one gave him a second look. And now, just an hour into his first shift, he was already seeing things that made his stomach churn. A supervisor stocky, with a permanent scowl, stormed past the worker who had nearly lost his fingers. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. "You slow down this line again, and you're out." The worker, a younger guy in his 20s, swallowed hard. "Sir, the machine almost." "I don't care, either keep up or go home." The supervisor didn't wait for a response. He stomped off, muttering under his breath. Ethan's jaw clenched. He wanted to confront the guy right then and there, but he held back. He needed to see more. He turned to the young worker. "You okay, man?" The guy exhaled shakily. "Yeah, just another day here." Ethan glanced at the machine. It was missing a safety guard. There should have been a protective cover in place to prevent accidents like this. He knew because he had approved those safety measures years ago. "What happened to the cover?" he asked. The worker shrugged. "Got removed months ago. Management said it slowed things down. They told us to be careful." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just bad management. This was dangerous. A loud crash echoed through the factory. Ethan turned just in time to see a crate topple over, barely missing another worker. The man scrambled back, cursing under his breath. No safety straps on the shelves, no proper stacking. It was a disaster waiting to happen. His hands curled into fists. A loud whistle blew, signaling the end of the shift. Workers shuffled toward the break area. Ethan followed, his mind racing. He needed to dig deeper. Inside the cramped break room, a group of employees sat at the battered table, eating from plastic containers. The air smelled like microwaved leftovers and sweat. Ethan slid into a chair next to a woman who looked utterly exhausted. "First day?" she asked, eyeing him. "Yeah," he lied. "Didn't expect it to be this bad." She laughed dryly. "You'll get used to it or quit." Another worker, an older man with grease-stained hands, leaned in. "They don't fix anything here. You see the machine on line 3? It's been acting up for weeks. Management won't shut it down, 'cause they don't want to lose production time." Ethan gritted his teeth. "That's insane. Someone's gonna get hurt." The older man nodded. "Already have. Last month, Joe got his hand caught. They sent him home with a write-up for not being careful." Ethan's stomach churned. This wasn't just negligence. This was reckless disregard for human lives. He took a slow breath. He needed to see the manager responsible for this. As if on cue, the break room door slammed open. The same supervisor from earlier walked in, his gaze scanning the room like a predator. "Break's over. Get back to work." Ethan locked eyes with him. The man sneered. "What are you looking at, newbie?" Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "Just wondering if you care about safety at all." The room went dead silent. Workers froze, eyes darting between them. The supervisor scoffed. "Safety, you want to work here or not, we don't have time for whining." Ethan's fingers flexed. He was going to remember this guy's face. For now, he had seen enough. But soon, They were all going to know exactly who he was. Ethan clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. The arrogance, the disregard. He had seen bad management before, but this was outright negligence. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay in character. If he blew his cover now, if he snapped, he wouldn't get the full picture. The workers around him were already shuffling out of the break room, shoulders slumped, moving like men and women who had long given up. No one challenged the supervisor. No one even looked at him. Ethan stood last, deliberately slow. The supervisor, his name tag read, McCann stared him down, lip curling. "You got a problem, newbie," McCann muttered, stepping closer. Ethan met his gaze, steady, just trying to understand how things work around here. McCann scoffed. "Yeah, well, here's how it works. You do what I say, you don't ask questions, and you sure as hell don't waste my time worrying about safety." He sneered the last word like it was a joke. Ethan burned that moment into his memory. He followed the others back onto the floor, the air thick with the scent of hot metal and oil. Machines whirred, conveyor belts rattled, and the occasional sharp clang of metal hitting concrete made his ears ring. He worked his assigned station, assembling parts, his eyes constantly scanning. He saw the missing safety guards, the overloaded shelving, the flickering lights above the welding stations. And then he saw something worse. A worker, maybe 50, with graying hair and a slight limp, was struggling to keep up on the assembly line. His hands fumbled, sweat dripping down his temple. His breathing was labored. Ethan was about to step and help him when McCann appeared like a shark smelling blood. "Move faster, old man," McCann snapped. The worker swallowed hard. "I'm trying, just give me a sec." McCann smacked the emergency stop button. The entire line screeched to a halt. The factory floor went silent. Workers froze. McCann turned, his voice booming. "This, right here, is what slows us down. You can't keep up. You don't belong here." The older man's face burned red. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Ethan felt his hands curl into fists. McCann turned to the rest of the line. "Back to work, and if I catch anyone covering for him, you're gone too." The machines roared back to life. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He worked, but his mind was racing. He had seen enough. That night, Ethan sat in his cheap motel room, staring at the notes he had scribbled in a small notebook. Neglected equipment. Overworked employees. No safety regulations enforced. Management running the place like a sweatshop. He ran a hand over his face. How had it gotten this bad? He had prided himself on building a company that valued its workers, but somewhere between expansion, profits, and trusting the wrong people, he had lost sight of what was happening on the ground. He thought about the man on the assembly line, the fear in his eyes, the exhaustion. And McCann. Ethan exhaled sharply. Tomorrow, he was going to push further. The next morning, he arrived early. The factory smelled of burnt metal and stale coffee. He spotted the older man from yesterday, rubbing his shoulder as he shuffled toward his workstation. Ethan stepped beside him. "You okay?" he asked quietly. The man blinked, surprised. "You're the new guy," he said, then he let out a dry chuckle. "You shouldn't talk to me. Management's watching." Ethan ignored that. "How long have you been here?" The man sighed, 22 years. Ethan's stomach twisted. 22 years, and they treat you like that. The man gave him a tired look. "Son, they don't care, they just want bodies to keep the machines running." Ethan clenched his fists. A crash echoed from across the floor. They both turned. A pallet had fallen, boxes spilled everywhere. A worker scrambled back, eyes wide. McCann stormed over, face red. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The worker stammered. "The straps were loose, "Excuses," McCann barked. "You break company property, you pay for it." Ethan had heard enough. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward. "That's not his fault," he said, voice steady. McCann turned, eyes narrowing. "What'd you just say?" Ethan took another step. "I said, it's not his fault. The straps were loose because no one here maintains them." A ripple went through the workers. McCann's eyes darkened. "You think you're smart, huh?" Ethan didn't flinch. "I think I'm tired of watching you treat people like garbage," he said quietly. McCann's nostrils flared. "That's so." He stepped closer, chest puffed. Ethan held his ground. And then McCann made a mistake. He shoved him. Not hard, not enough to knock him over. But enough. The factory floor went dead silent. Ethan inhaled slowly. Then he smiled. A cold, knowing smile. McCann frowned. "What the hell are you smiling at?" Ethan reached up, grabbed his fake name tag, and pulled it off. Workers murmured. McCann's brows furrowed. Ethan straightened. "My name isn't Mike," he said, voice ringing through the factory. "It's Ethan Cole, and I own this company." A silence. Then McCann's face drained of color. The workers stared, wide-eyed. Someone dropped a wrench. Ethan let the moment sink in. Then he turned to McCann. "You and I need to have a conversation." McCann's face was frozen in something between shock and horror. His lips parted slightly, his usual arrogance flickering just for a moment into uncertainty. The factory floor was dead silent, the only sound the distant hum of machines still running in the background. Every set of eyes was on Ethan. He let the silence stretch, let the weight of the moment settle over the room. Then he took a slow step forward. McCann flinched. "You shoved me," Ethan said, voice low, calm, controlled. McCann swallowed hard. You shoved me." Ethan took another step. "In front of dozens of employees, in my own factory." McCann's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. His hands twitched at his sides. He was scrambling, trying to figure out an escape, but there wasn't one. Ethan turned his head, looking around at the workers. "How many of you," he asked, his voice carrying, "has this man threatened? How many of you has he belittled, humiliated, pushed around?" No one spoke. But then, one by one, hands started to rise. First the older man from the assembly line, then the younger worker who had almost lost his fingers yesterday, then another, and another. Ethan's stomach twisted. McCann's face was pale now. "This is ridiculous," he snapped suddenly, his voice rising. "You come in here pretending to be one of them? You don't know what it's like here, you don't." "I know enough," Ethan cut in sharply. "I know the safety guards have been removed from critical machines. I know injuries are being ignored. I know that the bare minimum of maintenance isn't being done. I know that my employees, the people who keep this company running, are being treated like disposable parts in a broken machine." McCann scoffed, trying to regain some control. "If we slowed down for every little complaint, we'd be bankrupt in a month. You think you can just walk in here and—" Ethan was in his face now. "You think I don't know how this business works," he said, voice deadly quiet. "I built this company from nothing. I know every part of this operation, and I know when someone like you is cutting corners to make their own life easier." McCann opened his mouth, then shut it. Ethan exhaled slowly. You're done. McCann stiffened. You can't just. I just did. Ethan turned to a nearby worker. Get security. The man bolted. McCann's face twisted with rage. You're making a mistake, he hissed. Ethan tilted his head. No, the mistake was letting you run this place into the ground for as long as you did. Footsteps. 2 security guards, ones Ethan personally made sure were well-trained and professional, entered. Ethan didn't have to say a word. McCann stiffened, then let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. Unbelievable. He turned, storming toward the exit. But just before he reached the door, he glanced back. You think these people are gonna thank you? He sneered. Give it a month. The moment you start enforcing all these changes, slowing production, adding safety measures, profits will drop. You'll have to lay people off, you'll see. Ethan didn't flinch. McCann scoffed, turned, and was gone. A silence. Then someone let out a breath. Someone else whispered, "Holy shit." Ethan turned back to the workers. They were still watching him, caught between shock, uncertainty, and something else. Hope. He took another deep breath. I'm not here to fire one bad manager and walk away, he said. I came undercover because I needed to see the truth for myself, and I did. He let his gaze sweep over them. This place isn't just unsafe, it's broken, and that's on me. A murmur went through the crowd. Ethan nodded. I let myself get disconnected. I trusted reports instead of seeing things firsthand. And because of that, people got hurt. People were treated like garbage. That stops today. Another ripple of whispers. Ethan turned to the older worker, the one McCann had humiliated. What's your name? The man blinked. Ray. Ethan nodded. Ray, you've been here 22 years. Ray hesitated, then nodded. Ethan clenched his jaw. You should have been respected, a veteran worker, someone younger employees look up to. Instead, you were treated like a burden. Ray dropped his gaze. That's not happening again, Ethan said firmly. He looked back at the rest of the workers. Starting today, we're making changes. Real ones, not just words, not just promises. Another murmur. Ethan inhaled. Every machine will be inspected. Every missing safety feature will be restored. No exceptions. A few workers straightened. Any employee injured on the job will be given full medical support. No more writing people up for getting hurt. Someone swallowed hard. Any supervisor who treats workers like garbage is gone, effective immediately. The tension in the room shifted. Some people still looked skeptical, but others were starting to believe him. Ethan wasn't done. And wages, his voice was steady, firm, they're going up. A stunned silence. Then someone whispered, for real. Ethan nodded, for real. A beat of silence. Then, applause. It started slow, hesitant. Then it grew. Stronger. Louder. Ethan exhaled, feeling the weight in his chest loosen. This wasn't about earning their approval. It was about fixing what was broken. And this was just the beginning. The applause settled, but the energy in the room remained. Ethan could feel it, years of frustration, exhaustion, and quiet suffering finally given a voice. Some workers still looked wary, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. He understood. Words were easy. Promises had been made before. So he didn't stop there. He turned, motioning to his assistant, who had been waiting near the factory entrance, watching everything unfold. A woman in a sharp suit, clipboard in hand, stepped forward. The workers eyed her cautiously. This is Sarah, Ethan said, his voice carrying through the factory floor. "She's head of operations for the entire company, and starting today, she's stationed here, full-time." A ripple of murmurs. Sarah gave a tight nod. "I'll be working directly with you. No more layers, no more middlemen. You have concerns, you come to me." A worker in the back, arms still crossed, let out a dry chuckle. "And what happens when things go back to normal in a month? When the cameras are gone? When you forget about us?" Ethan turned to him. "I don't blame you for asking that." He took a step forward. "Which is why I'm not just making promises, I'm making changes right now." He motioned again. Two more figures stepped forward, one in a maintenance uniform, the other in a safety inspector's vest. "These men are here to do a full safety audit, every piece of equipment, every emergency procedure. If it's broken, it gets fixed. If it's unsafe, it gets replaced." Another murmur. Ethan wasn't done. "Effective immediately. No one here will work mandatory overtime again." That got their attention. A few workers glanced at each other, some straightened. "The forced overtime stops now," Ethan continued. "If you want extra hours, you'll be paid fairly. If you don't, you go home, no penalties, no threats." A younger worker, the one who almost lost his fingers the day before, let out a slow breath. His shoulders relaxed just a little. Ethan turned to Ray. "You've been here 22 years. His voice was steady, deliberate. "That should mean something." Ray shrugged. "Not much these days." "It will now." Ethan motioned to Sarah. She flipped through her clipboard, then looked up. "Ray," she said, "effective immediately, you're being promoted to shift supervisor." A stunned silence. Ray blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Ethan said. "You know this factory better than anyone. You've earned respect. Now you'll have the authority to make sure people are treated right." Ray's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, as if waiting for someone to tell him this was a joke. It wasn't. A few workers clapped, then more. Ethan turned back to the rest of them. "This is just the beginning. I know some of you don't believe me yet, I get it. But actions speak louder than words." He exhaled, "And I'll prove it." A beat of silence. Then slowly, the tension in the air shifted. A worker in the front nodded. Another murmured, "About damn time." Ethan felt something settle in his chest. This factory wasn't just going to change. It was going to become what it should have been all along. And he would never let himself become disconnected again.